There is something about the gracious magnanimity of God, who gives more than what people ever expect, more than what people ever need, that startles pusillanimous and selfish people like we all are. At the famous wedding in Cana, the generous twosome of a mother and son team saved the best for last and offered wine aplenty, more than the initially hapless couple could ever hope to lavish on their surprise guests. At an impromptu outdoor party for 5,000, not counting women and children, there was more than just great carpeting of good green grass to sit down on. The Lord provided more food than people could eat. In fact, they filled 12 baskets full of leftovers at the end. Last Sunday, more than just material provisions characterized God and His forgiving loving kindness for His erring people. No, true forgiveness does not only mean offering a clean slate to people a few precious and limited times. No, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. And yes, you heard it right last week. In fact, we all proclaimed it right after the first reading. The Lord is kind and merciful, slow to anger, and rich in compassion. Today, contrary to all expectations of a people like us, who could be unwilling and unready to be surprised by the same gracious and magnanimous God, the Gospel account startles us, even scandalizes us, as the very hearers of Jesus were shocked on hearing about the unfair situation of workers who were called at different times of the day, who were expected to do varying amounts of work in varied lengths of time, and yet were paid the same sum in the end. Those who put in more work for longer time, and those who put in much less for even much less time, received the same measly sums in consideration of their services. Our senses, attuned to the ways of the world, immediately spot injustice. Our sensibilities, deeply steeped in a capitalist, consumerist, no work, no pay mentality based on quantifiable and measurable outputs, immediately notice unfairness. In a materialistic world which increasingly considers work as just one of the many commodities that can be bought for the right price, we all cringe at the thought that those who put in quantifiably more ought not to have been summarily and shabbily shortchanged like that. This parable is the most difficult one to be commenting on today as any other day, and it becomes difficult for one simple reason. The paradigms and the templates we used to understand it are not the paradigms and templates of a God whose law of love and whose perfection of justice is found in His love. It is most difficult to explain, let alone understand in our times, because the templates we use are simply not those of God. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. As one who loves to trek up tropical mountains, my most awaited and most exhilarating moment is always the rare and singular experience of being on top of the world, looking down on everything as far as the eye can see. From atop one's glorious perch, one sees things differently. Things and events gain perspective. What appeared earlier to be an endlessly winding and uphill road going nowhere now appears purposeful, meaningful, and goal-focused after all. What one earlier on was most likely cursing, one now, from one summit perspective, is most likely blessing. Distance lends enchantment to the view. From a distance, as the famous song tells us, there is harmony. There is something in today's liturgy and readings that needs to be subjected to this template that the singer refers to as looking at life and the world from a distance. That perspectival distance is suggested by the strange-sounding story of the Lord, whose focus goes beyond the myopic here and now reality of a world bogged down on the non-essentials and on the merely quantifiable. That template is the bigger picture that Christian faith offers us. That template of the messianic eschatological times in which the first shall be lost and the lost shall be first. This template is not one characterized by a worldly and strictly mathematical equality of justice. This template goes beyond the demands of a predictable justice as the world knows it. This is the template of a God whose graciousness and mercy and whose compassion and loving kindness are never to be tied up and equated with the thoughts and ways of the world. I would like to suggest that the template the liturgy today would have us acquire is that of being open to surprises not of man's predictable sense of justice, but to the unpredictable surprises of God's grace, God's love, God's kindness, whose measure in the end is to love without measure. Openness to the template of God's surprises would then mean openness to His grace and graciousness to us, His people, that in the end shows us what God essentially is like. At this point, we cannot but agree with the inspired psalmist who declared, as we all do today, "The Lord is near to all who call upon Him." Looking at things from that perspective, from that vantage point, we see as St. Paul sees. For him and for us Christian disciples, pain and suffering and even death no longer could be seen as defeats and losses. Life itself and whatever it offers us, for as long as it is life with Christ, cannot be anything else but gain. For to me, life is Christ and death is gain. Looking at our lives from that perspective, we begin not only to see the right things, but we also see them rightly. Instead of focusing solely on what is wrong with the world, with our country, with the political and economic situation, we focus more and more on what is right and what is righteous in the world that is governed and watched over by a just and gracious God. We then learn at the feet of this world's most tremendous and passionate lover the same passion for justice and righteousness, perfected by an equally intense passion for love, mercy, and graciousness. No more talk of unfairness and injustice here then. Such talk can only come from using wrong templates. Today's Mass offers us the right templates. Pitted against said biblical and Christian templates, everything now is seen as grace. Todo es gracia, todo es vida. As Saint Teresa of Avila used to say, no more feeling of being shortchanged. From a distance, there is more than just harmony in our lives, much more. We see that like all the workers asked to work by the landowner, we all stand to receive more, a lot more, than we ever deserve. And this, my dear friends, is your Kalakbay at Katoto in this week's episode of Puso sa Puso, saying thank you and God bless you.